see that there is more to this than I thought. And then you've passed the gift along, if you like. Then they begin the journey, and the evolution of consciousness which results then carries on. So I think very much there is an onus on those studying crop circles to make sure they pass the baton on, if you like, to new people who are coming to this mystery, so that they can try and provide some insights and take the journey of the mind themselves. I think that's very important.
Absolutely, and we've seem to have been going through different types of patterns throughout the years, and it's kind of a difficult question, I know, but do you expect something in particular of the 09 season?
Oh, I think most researchers have realized that making predictions about crop circles is a futile business. I mean, there have been some, accurate predictions made. My suspicion is we'll have another year of, marvelous designs mixed with a few that aren't so marvelous. I don't think we're quite at that stage of grand revelation that I think some people are expecting or hoping for. Those who believe the crop circles are caught up with anticipating the 2012 changes, whatever they may be, I think they are hoping that there will suddenly be this year where there are more formations than ever and, patterns that are even bigger and more exciting. And maybe that will come to pass, but I think not yet. And I get the feeling it will be, what I've called in the past a holding operation. I think they're just doing what they do, and I don't think we're yet ready for a final statement. But who knows? Maybe we get to 2012 and something special will happen, or the opposite happens, and they will stop.
Right, exactly.
Of course, this is a possibility that whatever impetus is creating them will actually cease. And we could one day find no crop circles in the fields, and that in itself would be as big a puzzle. But maybe if they're here to herald a time of change, well, of course, now that time of change appears to be almost with us, maybe they won't need to appear anymore. But I think still a few more years of this before it goes on to something else, I suspect.
So was it this topic then of crop circles that kind of led you on in your path, if you will, and you began to looking into other areas that has taken you more towards this, the agenda of truth, as your latest or new upcoming book is called?
Well, that's right. Now, I mean, most people who become involved with, any level of mystery, sooner or later find their eyes being open to other subjects that they took for granted. Because things like the statement, well, all crop circles are man-made. People take these things for granted until they see the evidence. And then they realize there is evidence that they've not heard about in the mainstream or that they've not been told about. And, of course, once you start thinking about one subject like that, soon you begin to apply that line of thinking to many, many other subjects. And so, the world of the unexplained attracts people who have, quite radical alternative views on the everyday reality that we have presented to us by the media. And you soon realize that what has been presented is a facade. It's not as the world really is. That much soon becomes clear. And because of that need that I personally have to get to the bottom of mystery, even if you can't come up with the solutions, but just to peel off the layers of being misled by, this tendency that our society has to pretend that everything is explained when it isn't, that's led me to really look at all the different layers that are going on at the moment, which lead people to believe in things like conspiracy theories. And we do now seem to live very much in times where, what we thought was is not how it is. And I think the banking crisis, the economic crisis is waking a lot of people up to realizing, well, maybe the world isn't like I thought it was. People think they were safe, they were cozy, their money was being looked after. Now that's become very clear that's not the case. And that also there is a pretty obvious trail of deception and corruption, which has kept the truth about the way the money world has been running for a long time. And now people are becoming more open to that. They're beginning to want to know more about many other levels, including the levels of the more mysterious. So I think we now live in extremely interesting times because of that.
Maybe you can paint a picture for us a little bit, if you will, and I know that you will. This is something that you'll go into more detail then on the alternative view when you're going to do your speech there or talk there. But what is some of the problems you see more than beyond like what we're going through now with the financial system and banking system? And would you say that is being done for a particular purpose in order to, well, some people talk about this idea that they want to reform, of course, the economic system in order to bring in, first of all, regionalized currencies, but then after a while, even a one world currency. Where do you see this going, so to speak?
Well, this is one of the areas that I've been writing about. Now, what I'm trying to do with the book, The Truth Agenda, which is sort of in its final stages now, is to try to offer to people who are sort of on the fringes of interest in this kind of other way of looking at things, but who maybe are not quite ready for a huge book the size of a telephone directory with lots of tiny writing. They need something that they can relate to, and that isn't too overwhelming, and that's very much what I'm trying to look at the moment in the book, is like, okay, well, what would all this conspiracy that many people believe in, what would it be there for? What would be the general view of this? Why is it needed? And after a while, I think you can begin to put together, I think, a fairly sort of good possibility of a scenario, because it's very clear that those in power have far more interest in, shall we say, levels of occult knowledge than they might let on. And I think that a lot of the ancient prophecies and the predictions are things that there are certain people who pull the strings of the world, the powers behind the powers, if you like. Yes. I think are very aware of the possibility that we might be entering a huge time of change. And what seems to be the view, increasingly is becoming likely, is that these powers want to make sure that if there is an event that in any way threatens to overturn the old order, that they stay on top, that they stay in command. Yes. So that perhaps what is happening is that they are now trying to create webs of intrigue and in particular put in place controls. There is a huge mandate of very draconian control, which has very much come about since 9/11.
Yes.
And we're now seeing this really begin to become almost so in your face, so obvious that it's not even hidden anymore.
That's right.
And a lot of people think that this control is to make sure, as I say, that if there is a change, that these people, if that's what they are, do not lose control. So, therefore, you can look at so many things that have happened in, history, full stop, but in particular recent history, like 9/11, like even things like the space program, and, you can look at obvious things, of course, like the weapons of mass destruction, catastrophe. You can look at these in a new light and say, well, maybe there is a pattern unfolding. Yes. And maybe the economic crash is not an accident, but maybe that in itself has something that has been engineered to help create this mandate of control. And there's certainly plenty of people that believe that is the case. They don't believe that it was an accident that we're now in this position, but that it's been contrived basically to try to create this machination, this plot, to make sure that a very few people have a lot of centralized power. And hence, as you say, you then come to this vision of a one-world government where very few people will have a lot of power. And this is what a lot of people believe is going on. And, of course, the euphemism for this, which we hear now spoken openly about, is the New World Order.
Yeah.
Which was a phrase that Gordon Brown was fond of anyway, but now we've just had Barack Obama and Gordon Brown openly declaring a new world order. But amongst conspiracy theorists, and by the way, I have no shame in using that term, sure. Because by definition that's what people who consider these things are, they're saying, well, this is what we've been saying for years. Now we see the creation of this centralized new world power, unfolding before our very eyes. So I think a lot of people are now shocked at how quickly what was theory is now beginning to look just like everyday reality now.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember just a few years ago, basically you had to like scan the back of the papers, as it were, to find these articles about corruption, how the agenda is being played, the geopolitical game, as it were. But these days it's like it's all over the place, and you can go to any mainstream news website and basically read, and it's right there in black and white, in front of our faces. It's really, really incredible. And when you also talk about control, I see that this has to do with the legal aspect. Obviously, there's more draconian laws coming in and so forth, but what I also seeing is the kind of the technological control in the back of this. They're setting up the surveillance grid, everything that has to do with tracking, tracing you, and so forth. Is that something that you go into as well in your book?
Yeah, very much. I mean, obviously, the technological world has enabled levels of surveillance that we couldn't have dreamt of a few years ago. Although, obviously, George Orwell's nightmare vision anticipated it in a way that is now coming true. But, yeah, certainly, I mean, the advent of electronic communication and, obviously, the easy availability of cameras does now mean that we are now in a position where I think we can fully expect to be surveyed at every point of the day where we go outside of our houses. And obviously, once the new ID card schemes come in, which are not just a piece of plastic in your pocket, but are going to be, biometric and include a lot of details about your DNA, where you go, what you buy, what you do, which sooner or later will be available on a centralized database. Now, there are denials that this is what they're setting up will do, but without that kind of centralized information point, the whole ID system would not function. It wouldn't serve a purpose. So I think they're being disingenuous in the way they discuss ID cards. And, of course, the ID card will very soon blossom into what many, many people like David Icke have been saying for years, which is we will then see microchipping, where instead of just carrying a card, you will literally have a little chip put inside your flesh. And obviously many people feel very uncomfortable at the idea of that kind of thing because we couldn't be sure what that chip was doing. And it seems, I think, for many, an uncomfortable step too close to becoming sort of part android, and I think it's the beginning of a rocky road. But these are the issues which are now coming up. So, yeah, absolutely, surveillance as well as the controls are things we're going to hear more about. Although I thought it was very interesting that today, in England anyway, our Home Secretary Jackie Smith has had to back down slightly on the plans for a centralized database of everybody's internet records and who people email and what websites they look at, because there were, many complaints that this really was going too near the Big Brother world.
Yes.
Although even there, although they're now saying they won't do it quite like that, basically what they're now planning instead is to farm it out to private businesses who instead will keep the records of everything that we communicate electronically. So I suspect that we're not going to get away from this too easily. But this, of course, is then a question of why. Why do they need all these kinds of controls? Why do they need this information on us? And, of course, in an ID world, whether it be a chip in your arm or a piece of plastic in your pocket, once that governs your entry to shops or offices or public places or public transport, if that stops working, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
If somebody decides that you are perhaps, shall we say, an unwelcome element in society and you find one day your ID doesn't work, suddenly you will find yourself very much on the fringes of society. You won't be able to buy anything. You won't be able to go anywhere. You will become very much a kind of social leper, really. And I think this is quite a clever way of making sure in that world, if we had a more, shall we say, fascist-like government ever come to power, they would have the means to, shall we say, remove awkward elements in society, not by having to do anything too drastic, but simply by removing people from the ID database. Yes. So this is the world we're now moving into, and I think what's troubling at the moment is when you tell people about this, they look at you like you're talking science fiction. It's not.